Hello, characters out there on the interwebs. It is I, Rambling Jer, and I am here to entertain you with stuff. Yay! First things first, let me put myself in the corner. I think I'm in the corner. Alright, this week was very frustrating learning stuff. I got into this whole thing with trying to get some text to show up, but I'm not getting into that this week. I don't want to. I'm not going to. I will do that next week, maybe. Or I will end this and I will do a Minecraft playthrough. I might just do that. This week I'm going to do 3 subjects. I'm going to do math, I'm going to do system input-output, and I'm going to do loops. Specifically only while loops and if loops, so I'm going to get into 4 loops maybe next week, if I don't play with building blocks first. Math. Just before we get into the math, let's look at how we define the variations on variables. We can define them as integers, which is int. We can define them as double, which means it has some kind of decimal point after it. We can define it as string, which means it's going to be some kind of text-based thing of indeterminate amount. I think there is a length to that, actually. There are others, but this is really all I've used in my code so far. I think there is also float and long. Float, I think, has very long decimal places, and long is something as an enormous number. I've had use for neither of those, so until I do, I'm really not going to get into them too much, but they do exist. But int, float, string, that's the main ones. For math, it really isn't as scary as it sounds. All it is 2 variables, you define them both, and then you set some third variable, and you set it equal to whatever you're doing with the other 2. It's really not that big a deal. You just have a bunch of operators like your plus, multiplication, division, and minus, and you put them in between 2 things. That's pretty much it. It gets more complex than that, but it starts with that, as with any kind of math. So with programming, we'll start with that. First, let's define 2 different variables. What I used in my code for just demonstrating general code, I've had some value and some other value. For a third value, I have some total value. We just set that equal to the 2 other values. And we can put a plus sign in between them. We can put multiplication, which is a little star. We can put division, which is a /, or we can put a minus sign. And it will just output the difference between those to the console. The only thing we have to do is call that variable when going to the screen, which I'll cover in system input-output in a moment. The only other math-related thing that I did this week besides just this basic material is remainders. Remainders are represented with the percent sign. Percent sign basically takes the division between 2 variables and then looks at what's left, and it outputs that. So if you have 5 and then you have 2 going to that, it goes into it twice, but the remainder will be 1. So yeah, if you got something percent something else, you'll get the remainder of those 2 objects. That's really all there is to that. That's what I was going after with this function here. I was trying to get something with containers. It really didn't make any sense, but I really don't know what application you use this program for, where you're trying to figure out how many of container B goes into container A, or what remainder you have. But it works, it doesn't crash, so win. Yes. Next is system input-output. All this is about is taking something that you figured out with the code and outputting it to the console. This has nothing to do with the frames that I did last week. I mean, we can output the variables to those frames, but we're dealing with the console for this concept here. What you do is take system.out.print or print line, and then between 2 parentheses, ending with a semicolon, you put in quotes within those parentheses whatever it is you're trying to output. That could be just basic text, but if you also put some kind of variable in there, it will output that to the console. Now if you want to put regular text and you want to put a variable together, you put a plus sign between them. The quotes plus space and then whatever the variable is. And there you go. And then you can output that to the screen and you're good to go. Okay, for input, we need to import one other thing we need import java.util.scanner at the very top, and then we can create a scanner. Now the scanner, all it's doing is scanning for any kind of input that is coming from the user. In this case, we're going to use a keyboard. Now I'm defining it as keyboard, but you can really define this as anything. You can call it a sponge if you really wanted to. You define the scanner in this way, and then when you're calling it, you type whatever you call it. In my case, is keyboard.nextDouble. Now you can do next integer, next string, next whatever you have. I want to have some kind of decimal number coming in. So I do keyboard.nextDouble, and it looks for the next thing I type, whether it's a regular number or whatever, and it'll look for that. Loops! Now in order for me to check to make sure that I've entered the right thing, I need to use loops. The big thing I use in great abundance in this section is the while loop. All it does is saying while you're doing some kind of crazy thing, stay within the parentheses. And until it fails that statement, it will continue to stay in there. So what we do is we set it to some kind of negative amount. So it's kind of the opposite of what we want. So in the case of some of these, what we have is we have some kind of variable, whether it be, is it next double, is B less than A, or anything that stands. So for instance, this check is saying, is it a double? So if I type like ABC in there, it will keep it between these two parentheses. So until I type a number, I'm not getting to the next thing. It's going to keep outputting that statement. That way I can check to make sure that I'm staying within the confines of what I'm trying to do with the variable. I want numbers. This makes sure I get numbers and I don't get a bunch of jargon like, you know, ABC or splunge or a giant ampersand. And you can do any kind of check. Like the next one is making sure that it's a positive number. It's making sure that A is greater than 0 by asking, is it not? And that's the exclamation point is not. So not A is less than or equal to 0. So as long as it's a negative, it's going to keep asking me the same thing until I give it a positive number above 0. And these loops go all the way down to make sure I stay within the confines of what I'm looking for. The last thing is the if statement, which is very simple. It says, if this, then do what's in the curly brackets. And that's it. So in this case, we say if A is equivalent to 52, and that's what the double equals is equivalent, and you need to use that with if statements. If A is equivalent to 52, then output this statement, splunge. And you see if we type for our return in something that's not 52, we don't see splunge. But if we do type 52, look at that, there it is, splunge. So very simple, and this has many applications. Like if you're trying to look for something specific, you can say, if this, do this, if this, do this, if this, do this. It's more efficient to use a for statement in many cases, but I'll go into that next week. Thanks for sticking around for my goofy Java video. If you liked it or you have something to say, you can go down and say it in the comment section. Feel free to subscribe and like and all that jazz. I will go ahead and see if I can learn something else Java related and try to fix my crazy broken program. And I'll see you next week for more Java or Minecraft playthrough. What do you think? Want to play Minecraft? That's the spirit.